Hello and welcome back to the channel. Dear sponsors, thank you so very much. And this is what, part 4 of the Battle of Tobago. This time we'll look at what we found as remains from the Battle of Tobago. And starting with this photograph, there is a reason why I'm beginning with this slide. The first thing, upper left, after all, it is the glamorous life of the maritime archaeologist that really attracts us to this life. And you can see an example of this wonderful glamour. It is about 40 degrees Celsius, 110 Fahrenheit or thereabouts. It is 97% humidity, and we're mixing concrete to produce control points from which to map our archaeological sites. What is there not to like about maritime archaeology? And then, of course, what is the Caribbean most famous for as far as diving is concerned? Of course, it's great, fantastic visibility. Visibilities of up to 30 meters with crystal clear blue water, where it is full of underwater sea life. Yes, unless you happen to be working with me. Because as my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Doug Ingalls put it, if Kroum ever ends up diving in crystal clear water, he'll get disoriented. Trust me to find the one and only place in the Caribbean where if you have visibility of more than about 2-3 feet, it was a lucky day. That's yours truly in full action. So, would you care to join me for my next diving archaeological adventure? As I mentioned before, West Hull undertook 2 surveys of the bay. In the 1990s, he located a number of potential wrecks. Some were ground-proof, but not all, by dropping divers. Some cannon were found, some ballast piles mostly, but none of these vessels were excavated. He believed that at least 2 are likely to belong to be remnants from the Battle of Rockley Bay from 1677. This is here shown on this slide as Tier B1, here is the triangle, and Tier B2. In 2012, after a long wait and thanks to the services of the American ambassador to Trinidad and Tobago there, and with the agreement of Mr. Chief Secretary London, I was granted a permit by the authorities in Tobago, by the Tobago House of Assembly, and allowed to begin an archaeological project. It was challenging because of the visibility. It was challenging also because, as you can see on this very same slide, this is exactly the area in which the ferries dock. So we had to work around and skedaddle out of the way whenever the ferries were maneuvering. That did not always work exactly as predicted. I had the opportunity to see the bottoms of the ferries once and live to tell the tale. It's an interesting adventure at any rate. So we returned. West Hull showed us the locations of Tier B1, Tier B2. It was impressive to watch him find them by simply guesstimating bearings on dry land. When he had surveyed these, he had not had GPS. Tier B1 had been subject to a brief season of excavation in the year 2000, led by a cultural resource management company from Trinidad in conjunction with actually some quite well-known archaeologists whose name I will beg not to mention for a variety of reasons. There is only one report publicly available. It is on the Nautical Archaeology Society's website, and it was produced as fulfilling for rank 2, that is a whole recording. So it is not to be looked upon as a detailed archaeological report. In fact, In many ways, it is most interesting for what it does not mention rather than for what it does mention. The report, however, identified TRB-1. TRB stands for Tobago Rockley Bay. Wreck 1, at the time they called it Wreck A, identified it as a 17th century, probably Dutch ship. So naturally, this is where we began our excavations. This, of all the places with bad visibility in this bay, this specific location was by far the worst. On this slide, you are seeing the opening of a trench and a few timbers, but this was only one day in which we had visibility sufficient to take a picture, or to take photos, or even to see what exactly we were working. That was done in 2013. 2012, we had located the original trench that the previous expedition had excavated. We reopened it because we had a secret weapon, namely Professor Nigel Nailing, world-renowned, world-class dendrochronologist who would have helped us with identifying the timbers and dating them. The report said that dendro dates had been taken from this site and sent and dated to the 17th century, but there is no lab in the world that has record of this, these samples. So one wonders. We were able, here you see the label that was left by the previous expedition, over here on the left and also down here on the right. To move and to show you what this actually is, here is the drawing, the site plan that I developed of this trench. Suffice it to say that we discovered that this is not a 17th century wreck at all. This probably is a colonial-built 18th century vessel, likely prior to the American Revolutionary War or close to it, because there is no evidence for coppering on the outside, but the system of framing is very clearly British or British-derived. The timbers, unfortunately, did not yield a date. And as I said, research and consultation with the dendrochronological laboratories that are likely to have worked on this one did not yield any further information. So this is an 18th century. It clearly was not what we were looking forward. Among everything else, here on the drawing you see this black dot. This is a fore and aft fastener that is connecting two futtocks together. We have here in this photograph, taken on that one day, you can see the concretion. This is the concretion right in between the two timbers. Such fore and aft fasteners on 17th century Dutch vessels simply do not exist. They have never been recorded on any of the, by now, numerous wrecks that have been excavated. But they are very consistent with 18th century British and American style of framing vessels. So eventually we closed the trench and we moved on to try to find our beloved 17th century wrecks. Meanwhile, a video was given to me by a participant in that excavation that showed a small gun being raised on the barge from which they were diving there. No one knew what had happened with the gun subsequently when what was supposed to be a conservation laboratory had been dismantled and turned over to the ferry services. Eventually we found the gun thrown out and abandoned. We moved it under cover. Later periods, the only thing that is worth mentioning about this gun is that it is cast iron. It must have been in excellent state of preservation when it was raised, but decade or more in thrown out in all weathers has done it absolutely no favors. But I am confident that this is indeed a gun coming from the 17th century naval battle because of the location of the trunnions. As you can see, they are below the center line of the gun. This position changes in the 1740s when the trunnion is moved to the center line of the gun. Also look at the cascabel in the end of the gun. It is fairly flat, and the more recent the gun, the more rounded this would be. Here is a documentation, a 3D model of the gun that we eventually produced, or rather my colleagues produced the model. Dr. Doug Ingles and I think Taro Yamafune also participated. That was done in 2016. Returning to 2013, we moved to what had been known as Reg B, in which we renamed rather imaginatively TRB2, Tobago Rockley Bay Rec 2. It was an interesting site, very promising site. It showed clearly 17th century gun. I already discussed how you can determine it. It is lying upside down. It was interesting because around the trunnions and the aft part of the gun, there is a steel cable wrapped around it. And this suggested, in fact, once we uncovered it, that the gun is not found in situ. That is to say that somebody was attempting to steal the gun. And in the battle between 17th century technology and 20th century or 21st maybe even century technology, namely steel cable versus gun, the gun, 17th century gun won hands down, broke the cable, and is still on the bottom, preserved. It is lying upside down. The steel cable is clear evidence that it was moved. Somebody attempted to move it and for whatever reason failed to do so. At first this was not immediately obvious because of the overburden and the fact that there were orange-colored bricks barely visible from the bottom in front of the gun gave us high hopes that we may be looking at an actual wreck of a 17th century ship. There probably is a wreck, but subsequent excavation demonstrated that these bricks are Scottish manufactured after 1837 because we found the stamp of the manufacturer. They are stored in a chest that is barely surviving, so very likely there is a wreck there, but if there is, it is from the hurricanes of the 1840s and is not anything to do with the battle. So on we moved from that location. One of the great problems of the bay is that this is the area, the naval battle took place exactly where the ferry boats are maneuvering now and rotating. And when they turn around, they create a vortex on the bottom that blasts to bits and pieces any cultural heritage material that is down on the bottom. This slide here is showing you exactly this. Disturbed material, broken ceramic bottles, smoking clay pipes from 17th through 19th century, glass bottles, broken glass bottles, pottery. Here is a sample of differently dated material that has been found. This metal coffee pot in the back is from the Victorian era, probably 1850s. Some of the rest of the material is 19th century, some of it is 18th century, like this bottle, for example. This is a bottle that Jack Sparrow would have recognized immediately. It is tail end of the 17th century. It is in archaeology known as onion glass bottle because of the shape of it. And the pipes are probably 19th century. So by 2014, in March, we undertook a major survey in the area. It was clear that what was believed to be 17th century wrecks are not anything of the sort. It was the American archaeologist J.B. Pelletier did the survey for us, for which I'm very, very grateful. He's a fantastic professional. We were able to locate quite a number of targets. And while we were surveying, Tier B5 proved to be the most interesting of all of them. And so far, it is the only one confirmed to be 17th century wreck and to be accessible to archaeologists. Unfortunately, it happens to be the top of a reef. The reef is long dead. So what we see on these illustrations, on the 4 photos here, is actually the remains of the wreck. This is not a living reef. This is a concretion formed by the remnants of the wreck. Alas, absolutely no timber survives. Bricks, ballast piles, and of course the first thing that we recognized with my friend and partner in crime, Jason, whom you see here on one of the images. These are cannon. And they're 17th century cannon. They do form a logical stretch. Here on the side plan, you can see that they are reasonably closely oriented. They do follow a logical path which suggests the presence of a shipwreck rather than accidental loss of a gun in this area. We were able to open one trench of excavation here, right where we discovered a very high concentration of bricks. During the survey, we measured more than 30 bricks, and subsequent research demonstrated that the standards, they were very close in their measurements, and the standard matches the Leyden brick standard of the 1640s. Subsequently, when I published the preliminary report of this, a colleague, a peer reviewer, mentioned that he is unaware of any such standard or bricks from Leyden, and therefore there is no guarantee that this is a 17th century wreck. Well, there is a guarantee. We have proven it beyond doubt already, but when you open Nicolaes Witsen's book on shipbuilding, which was published, the first edition, in 1671, and you go to Cambus, that is to say the galley construction, for the pinnace that he describes, what do you see? How do you construct a galley of 7 by 7 Amsterdam feet? First, he said, you put heavier first of all, you double the planking in this area to bear the weight. Then you build a lip around it and you fill the space with sand. On top of the sand, you put a copper sheet. On top of the copper sheet, you build it up firmly with Leyden bricks. Specifically speaks of Leyden bricks. Lo and behold, when we finally excavated this trench, sure enough, on top of the reef there was sand. That may be intrusive material, of course. We can't guarantee that it's part of the wreck. But there was a copper sheet that clearly was not part of hull sheathing, so it is not intrusive material, especially since it was under the firmly concreted top of the site. And in context, on top of this, we found numerous Leyden bricks in place. With this, ladies and gentlemen, I think we have pretty conclusively proven that that was the galley of the ship. Then the guns are of great interest because they fall into 3 groups. Without raising them, conserving them, removing the concretion, of course we cannot be 100% positive about their diameters. But we can form, and did form, a pretty good estimate. And one of the cannon may be as large as 24 pounders, but 3 of them are at least 18 pounders. We have another medium-sized gun that probably is an 8 or a 12 pounder. That is lying right here where it says number 2. There's side by side a large gun and a medium gun. And close to it, at number 4 and at number 1, we have small guns that are probably 3 or 5 pounders in that area. So, we have 3 different calibers of guns. We have the galley. We have smoking pipes that are almost all of them are Dutch, with 2 exceptions. The only 2 are English made. I will return to some of the other discoveries. For the sake of argument, for the time being, trust me on this one, it is a 17th century site, no question about it. But what is the arrangement of the guns that we're seeing telling us about it? Well, there is only one location on the ship where you can find bricks, the galley, and you can find 3 different calibers. This implies a 2-decker, and it implies that we are right around the forecastle. The smallest cannon are the ones that would have been on the top of the forecastle, of course, and the medium and large guns are the 2 gun decks. So unquestionably, two-decked man of war. Here is a slide that is showing you the laden bricks that we recovered and their average dimensions. I have included a sample. This is an illustration from the book on the Prince Willem, because it is showing you a typical 17th century galley. The same style of galley was used also on Wasser. It is characteristic on the left, lower left of the image. You see the bow area with the galley and the chimney here to the far on a platform hanging in the hold of the so-called Hohenzollern model that was destroyed by bombing in Berlin during World War II, but luckily before that Hermann Kettel recorded in detail and published it. So what I'm arguing is that this fragment of the Kettel drawing is showing the equivalent of the area in which we are operating, where our trench is. It is showing us the main gun deck, the upper deck, and the forecastle together with the galley. So we are in the bow of wreck. And that is significant. Particularly significant is the fact that the large guns are really big. They're at least 18-pounders. Because this is what we're using to try to determine which of the ships we have there. So let me show you a few of the finds here. You're seeing, actually, this is yours truly. You can recognize him by the long curly hair that is so clearly visible and dominating the image. So yes, absolutely, it is me excavating on top of the reef in the trench with the water dredge, and sometimes you find strange things like sea turtles. Okay, we didn't excavate the turtle, it simply floated into area and came to check on what on earth are we doing and to feed from the nutrients that we were releasing. This image here is showing you something that is a rarity for the 17th century, namely a fork. We found quite a few, 3 or 4 forks. You see down here a smoking pipe. You can see it is written clearly. But the things that really settle the 17th century date is this pulle over here. On this image you can see the pulle already clear. This is the big, large, it's Rhenish stoneware. It is usually known in literature as the Three Generals, because on the front of it, it has an image of Alexander, and on the 2 sides are the biblical generals, Joshua and David. It bears the date of 1589, which at least puzzled us, but this likely is the date of the mode rather than the pulle itself, although we do have records of pulles decades old still being in use. And the other one is a typical salt glaze, small jug, that is absolutely characteristic Rhenish stoneware of the 17th century. Then add to this wonderful collection the smoking pipes. Here a sample of better preserved smoking pipes are shown. Many of them are manufactured in the Dutch city of Gouda. No question about it, 17th century. You can recognize the 17th century not only by the marks and decorations, but also by the shape of the bowl of the pipe and the angle that the pipe and the stem are forming. Therefore, the date is beyond question. Ultimately, we discovered also farther forward of it a typical characteristic early anchor. How do I know that it is early and it is not, for example, from the storms of the 1840s? Look at the shank of the anchor on this image. It is much longer than is the spread of the arms. The arms at the crown of the anchor are nearly sharp angle. This is indicative of earlier periods. And by earlier period, I mean 16th, 17th centuries. By the second half of the 18th century, this has changed, and the spread of the arms is much closer in length to the length of the shank. This area was quite interesting. It also happened to be the headquarters of a Moray EO. And let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I prefer to be in a different social circle from Moray EOs. I believe when we first encountered each other, I beat the world record for fast swimming underwater. So, we have shown the guns, we have demonstrated already that this is a 17th century ship. The question is which one? The smoking pipes, the bricks from the galley pretty firmly indicated this is a Dutch warship of the 17th century. We are unaware of any large Dutch 17th century ships except the ones that were lost during the 3rd of March 1677 battle. Therefore, this must be one of the wrecks of Banks' squadron. Question is which one? Here, as you see, I'm using the same broadsheet that I showed you at the beginning in one of the previous talks, but this time this is not a colored version, it is the original engraving. Because this is helping us with locations. First of all, which are the vessels that could carry such large cannon? Wapen van Zeeland? Possibly. We do not know anything about it, but it is possible that she carried such large guns, being a 44-gun ship. We see her, however, down here on the shore. She was not burned, she was not destroyed. She did not sink, she was run aground. Next to her, the other vessel is Beschermer. Beschermer definitely had a battery of 18-pounders. But, again, very inconveniently, Beschermer did not sink during the Battle of Tobago. It was captured by the French and was lost when the French were attempting to reach Curaçao. Therefore, the wreck TRB5 cannot be either Wapen van Zeeland or Beschermer. The only other ship that could and did carry 18-pounders that is left in this is Huis de Kroningen. And if you look here, the fire where the drawing is showing the fire chips, this matches very, very closely the location of the reef. So, my conclusions to this are that I cannot prove that this TRB5 is Huis de Kroningen, but I can prove that it is not any of the other Dutch ships. Yet it is clearly 17th century, it is clearly Dutch. It was destroyed on the reef right where contemporary evidence suggests that Huis de Kroningen came to rest. Thanks to the brilliant father and son Willem van de Verde, we actually do have portraits of at least some of the ships in Banks' squadron. And here I am showing you on this slide a few of them. At the top are the two small frigates, Hoedenstern and Popkensburg. You are going to see this also listed in some sources as Papenburg. Whichever it is the correct spelling, these are images of the two frigates that were lost in the Battle of Tobago. Lower left is showing you Bescherming or Beschermer. Both variants exist in the archives. This was the flagship, the 50-gun flagship of Banks. And to the right, you see the older Huis de Kroningen, built in 1653. This image is right before the 4 days battle, and you can see her under full flags. There are two other drawings, closer portraits of Huis de Kroningen that exist. And here they are on this slide. The upper one is showing the stern that is held in France at the moment, the illustration. The lower one is in the Boymans Museum in the Netherlands. And it is a view obviously from the bow. Huis de Kroningen is interesting vessel because of its history. She is one of the ships that were ordered in the Netherlands and were supposed to be built for the Republic of Genoa. However, At the height of the First Franco-Dutch War, the States General confiscated the ship. They paid back Genoa the money, but they appropriated the ship and included it in the States Navy because they desperately needed larger vessels than they had up to this point. Two vessels, Huis de Kroningen and Huis de Zeehaen, are sometimes incorrectly considered sister ships. The Witsen was slightly smaller, but they are similar in size. In 1653, when she was added to the fleet, Huis de Kroningen, for about 3 weeks, carried the flag in September of 1653 of no lesser man than the great national hero of the Netherlands, Admiral General Nicolaes de Ruyter, frequently considered the foremost admiral of the era. This, of course, by itself already makes the site of very high importance. I recently have heard that another ship that can be affiliated with Nicolaes de Ruyter has been discovered. I do not know any details about it. For a long period, I believe that this is the only surviving material remains of a ship commanded at any point by the great admiral. And Nicolaes de Ruyter is for the Netherlands what George Washington is for us. He's venerated. He was an interesting character in many ways. He was a brilliant seafarer, very modest man. He led the Dutch to a series of great victories, and probably without too much exaggeration can be considered the savior of the nation in the 1670s. Only a man of his caliber could possibly have successfully resisted Rupert. So that is, in short, the story. Without being able to 100% certainly prove that TRB5 is indeed Huis de Kroningen, the bulk of the indirect evidence certainly suggests so, and so far no one in any publication has questioned the identity of the vessel. And the conclusions that I have reached. Thank you ever so much for listening to this. Thank you so much to the sponsors. I really appreciate your generosity. It means a very great deal to me. So with this, ladies and gentlemen, I wish you a most wonderful rest of your afternoon. Thank you, and see you soon again.